Hi all, this is Uranian Streams, Molly and myself, and we're continuing with our aspects rundown for astrology. And today we're going to do Pluto opposed, or rather Sun opposed Pluto, because the Sun is of primary importance. And then it's opposing Pluto in this aspect. Molly, you want to share a little about oppositions? What do you think about oppositions? Share with us.
Yeah, so it's when we have two planets in our chart at 180 degrees apart. So they are like complementary ends or poles of a single spectrum. So oppositions, they're considered a hard, meaning a more, glaring, you could say, aspect. But I think with the opposition, ultimately we're trying to find a synthesis point of the two polarities or two extremes. There can be a vacillation when we have planets in opposition. But if we've evolved with them and we're aware, we notice having the full spectrum kind of that channel that they create together.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, we have to take account of that. It's a polarity, so it can go back and forth, right? The energy can you can become it, someone else can become it. And I just want to note, as I did in the last video on Pluto conjunct Sun, that the karmic enterprise in a Pluto Sun opposition is that you have already embodied this energy before. You've already been both Pluto and Sun before. So when you're Pluto opposed opposition, you're learning how to you're learning how to deal with it in another outside of you. And so you're learning how to negotiate someone else embodying that powerful energy. Or to put it in a more metaphysical way, you're learning how to navigate that energy outside of you. You have already been that energy before and moved within it in your aura and your being. Now it takes over the people that come to you.
That makes so much sense, actually. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As I think about oppositions in my own chart, that's definitely feels accurate. Would you say we can project our oppositions onto the external environment, like almost anticipating them because they're energies we used to?
Well, I mean, that's what it is. And then it also depends on where you draw the line. Because if we're projecting, it can be problematic because then we're not self-identifying with our own responsibility in relationship to what's going on, right? And this is a plutonic problem. I mean, those of us who live in the underworld, Pluto's children, the biggest issue.
Say, I'm a child of Pluto. I'm just curious. That phrase is just funny to me.
Well, you're definitely a Lilith, so Lilith is definitely a child of Pluto. So
okay, that without revealing too much more, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I mean Nessus too as well. And anyways, we'll go through that another time. But Pluto definitely has brothers and sisters in that underworld, So
cousins.
I would say the issue with Pluto's children is that they relate to people based on projections and mirroring. And I don't mean like a positive expression of mirroring. I mean like that total like instinctual feeling the environment of someone else and attacking them for what they're making them feel, or they're feeling that other person is making them feel. Hence the projection. Hence the problems with boundaries. Hence the issues with control. Hence all these kind of enmeshed like push-pull relationship style mechanics, where someone is someone is avoidant, right? Extreme, or like push pull, like I'm here with you, I'm get away from me, you know what I mean? Like all these like extreme attempts to control their energy, you know, with someone or opposed to that someone. So there's just a lot of polarity playing with, and there's a lot of like enmeshed energy with Pluto. I mean, Pluto is a very dangerous, very addictive energy, right? I mean, it rules sex. Would we say? Does it rule that kind of?
It's a house. So yeah, the very bonded, shared resources, and you could say bonded sex in the sense that it's not just sex for fun
And,
or
and
contracts.
if Pluto is power, then sex is power. And what kind of power is sex? It's a power that it's the power that that we play in, that the relationships kind of, it's the space that relationships carve out for themselves. It's an energy that's very difficult to control, that can lead to obsession when it's not in a safe frame or boundary of sorts. Um, so Plutonic energy does represent power, and it represents the possible addiction to power. And yeah, I don't want to do a whole nother, like, you know, we have the other video where we kind of like broke down what Pluto is, but yeah, just in this situation, Pluto opposed another planet, in this case the life force energy, which is the sun. When you have Pluto oppose the sun, what you're dealing with is like someone is trying to take power over you. If you're a woman with this aspect, I would say that you could have a very dominating father, very dominating masculine energy that gets in your face, that tries to control you, until you can come to terms with that energy. Because again, we're not identifying that person as trying to control you. We're identifying that energy. And it still is a projection, because your own masculine energy, even as a woman, your own masculine within you has some control dynamics it's dealing with and perhaps projecting outwards. So deeper work has to be done with such. Molly, what do you think? Or what
Yeah.
do you feel?
So with Sun opposite Pluto, yeah, it's like the ego is being confronted with power. And I would say people with this opposition, as I kind of alluded to in the conjunction video, I kind of started talking about this opposition, is there's almost like an intense self-criticism, or almost like the ego almost kind of feeds off conflict in a way, you could say, with this aspect. And if it's not manifesting in a sense of creating, of striving towards something, right, or using it for transformation, then it could present outwardly as you know, maybe intense things happening to the person in their life. So yeah, I think when we're transmuting this aspect, or working with it in a sense, you don't feel so much like a struggle to prove yourself, but rather you're using that Pluto for inner transformation. And so maybe you don't have to meet the world with such obstruction or intensity, or like exposed or something.
It's just the more I listen to us talk about like Pluto dynamics, it's just like I'm talking about attachment dynamics, personality disorders. I mean, just like trauma, you know what I mean? Like people that are
It
just
sounds so intense, but it's like hard to talk about Pluto and not get into that frame, right?
hard not to, because that's what it is. It's destruction and repair. It's like
Right.
healing with an attempt to avoid becoming addicted to the abuse, both self-abuse or abuse of others.
Mm,
Control of self or control of others, because
yeah.
those are addictive capacities, you know.
Yeah. I would say the positive would be like the ego or the person can go through like incredible transformations um, throughout the life and face things and uncover power within themselves in the face of obstacles or in the face of fear. So one person, again, it gives a lot of depth. One person, a well-known figure who has this, well, I'll list two. One is Walt Disney, who had some sort of troubled kind of things happen to him in his life. And there's some darkness in some of the Disney movies for sure. There, a lot of them are based on like fairy tales, which Pluto it is connected to mythos, the hero's journey, the underworld, the all of those kind of things fit into it. But another one is David Foster Wallace. If you guys are familiar with that,
Yeah,
listener.
those are short stories. Not his big novel, but I've read his short. I enjoy his short stories a lot.
Yeah, essays. He has comedy too. I mean, a lot of his essays, he did some travel essays, and they're hilarious, so funny. But he had a lot of darkness in him actually, and super deep and super observant and aware. But you could tell in some of his writing his own plutonic. He had the opposition. His own. He had a sun in Pisces opposite Pluto in Virgo. But I had a quote from him that I think kind of unravels this aspect a little bit or reveals this aspect in his words. Do you mind if I share?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So one of his quotes from his book, I think it was just short nonfiction essays, This is Water. He says, if you worship money and things, if they're where you tap meaning in life, then you will never have enough. Never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths by the time they finally plant you. On one level, we know this stuff already. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, bromides, epigrams, parables, the skeleton of every great story. The trick is keeping the truth up front in daily consciousness. Worship power. You will feel weak and afraid. You will need even more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect. Being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out, and so on.
I mean, this relates back to the real lesson of Pluto, which is overcoming fear and dealing with your addiction to various forms of power and expression of power. I mean, whether it's like abuse over others, abuse over yourself. There's a lot of self-abuse in Plutonic people, you know.
Yeah, like objectifying yourself is the one example.
And the one other thing we can note here is like, if you have this aspect, you know, where are you in this life? In other words, have you come from the underworld? Did you live in the underworld of gangs and violence? I mean, I definitely had my time in that. I'm a plutonic underworlder. So it was interesting to observe, you know, like where have you lived and what worlds do you live in, especially with the Pluto. I have the Pluto conjunction. I don't have the opposition, but my moon has the opposition to Pluto. So that's very similar. Another luminary, like opposition, that tension. And I think that is like, I think you'll meet in the underworld with others with having that opposition, you know. And so you want to be, probably you already know to be careful of that, you know. There's definitely markers in the chart. Go ahead.
Yeah, with DFW, David Foster Wallace, the example I gave, he's an interesting case study of this aspect because you could sense in his writing his like awareness of this dynamic within himself and a lot of what he wrote about topically. Like he would write about depression and what it was if people were called like psychotically depressed and would kill themselves. And he almost could like frame like justifications for that, or understand why people reach that point. And he actually ended up ending his own life. So in a way, like suicide to me seems very Plutonic, because it's the literal manifestation of, you know, a metaphorical death and rebirth. It's like, and it is kind of selfish. And with Pluto's sun, there can be like a self-absorption. And he even has some quotes on how depression, in his opinion, is like a extreme self-absorption, was his perspective. He was struggled with depression. So it's very, very deep and very, there's a lot of awareness with Pluto. But sometimes, as we see in the opposition or the hard aspects, maybe the square too, or the conjunction, where if the person can't own it, it kind of owns them.
Yeah, I mean, you just like, I just want to add that last note. I mean, it's not just a tool, you know, it's not just an underworlder looking for outward expressions of violence. It's also the psychologist who's analyzing behavior and his own self and self-awareness. And it's such a, I mean, it's the sun of the underworld. So it's this intra-awareness where everything's aglow inside of you, all, including and especially the hells, the undeveloped parts of the self. And depression is something that, I mean, it's, I've never heard such an accurate definition of depression than self-absorption. Someone who has so Pluto heavily aspect in the chart, like I feel the heaviness of that from time to time. And you have to like be really self-disciplined with allowing yourself to feel and knowing when you're feeling and describe and being able to describe how you're feeling, to not lose touch and get lost in that heavy depression that's there, the heavy weight of that Plutonic sun.
Right, like almost another way to say what he said is like, it's a lack of perspective, right? A lack of gratitude, a lack of, I don't want to say a lack of gratitude always. Sometimes it is like a chemical imbalance, right? But you could say you're looping in a sense when you're depressed. You can't get a greater vision or view. You're stuck in the depths, you're stuck in the underworld, and you're kind of wallowing in a sense. So I thought that observation was like really profound. And you pointed out a beautiful positive channeling of this energy, which is that investigator piece in a sense. Because the sun, especially when it's in opposition, I think, to Pluto, because they can see each other, the sun can illuminate Pluto thing, collective unconscious themes, mythos, the occult, the hidden. The sun, when it's in opposition to Pluto on someone's chart, can allow that person to have this like, and with the other aspects as well, allow them to see, like you said before, X-ray and probe into what not always everyone can see. And so I would argue that with these aspects, and maybe the opposition that's more prominent, there could be an isolation piece to it, where because they feel so deeply, or rather see so deeply, they almost feel alienated in that experience. And that can be maybe challenging to think that you're, and you know, on one end it's a superiority thing or a power thing, but on a more humble way, perhaps the people feel like they can't relate to the common person because maybe they're like feeling things on a much deeper level. And so I would argue maybe people with this aspect, it's important to have people who are of like same depth, and they don't necessarily literally have to have this aspect also, but maybe they have other things in their chart that allow them to meet you kind of there. Maybe they don't have to go to the underworld with you, but they can at least explore with you.
Okay, you've driven that point to an example that I have. It's so great. So what I've noticed with Plutonic people, especially with the moon or the sun, is they'll do things like this. There's an example. I was traveling throughout South America one time, and I was staying at a hostel, and there was some guy who I befriended to a degree. We were mostly acquaintances, but to a degree. And I noticed that he was kind of always trying to chum around with this like third guy, who neither of us were, like, it was interesting because we both knew this third guy was on a different vibe. And at one time I asked him, I was like, why do you pal around with this like piece of shit? Like, that guy's obviously like not a cool person. He confided in me. You know what he told me? He was like, I'm purposely aligning myself with him so as to protect everyone around us, because he's trying to rob and he's trying to steal shit. And I'm just trying to watch him closely and keep people safe. And I was like, wow. After that, I did this chart and I saw like Pluto Moon conjunction, and I was like, interesting. We even got deeper into how like he was able to just like listen to people and get the truth out of them. And he did it in front of me. We were at like a table and having a big event, and he did that to a person. It was fascinating. Pretty brilliant projector, actually. He would just like sit and just like just questions, but like really calmly and neutrally. And before a person knew it, they'd be revealing whatever it was. Very interesting Pluto Moon character. I'll never forget that. Yeah, he broke that down to me. It was like, so in other words, what you were saying, to extend on what you're saying, he befriended people in the underworld to keep those keep the people in the regular world safe from these other underworlders. So he was like a bridge between the worlds. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what I was alluding to was like, for people who have this and maybe struggle with some of the shadows of it, it could be helpful to have people not necessarily keeping you in the underworld, but meeting you at your depths in a positive way, actually, in a way where you feel seen and not isolated.
My example was more connecting with them, but in a weird way, right? I mean, you're connecting with them to
Platonic way.
yeah. Interesting. Yeah. You're right. It was different and distinct.
But in a protective way. I see what you're saying, where he's wielding that energy, but in a way to kind of create a buffer with people who aren't, protect them from that. And I would say these people with these hard aspects to Pluto, tense aspects to Pluto, would be good, doulas or guides or shamans or people who can lead people through difficult experiences because they've had to process that within themselves.
Yeah, these people are definitely like taking you from one world to the next. These are transition kind of PowerPoints inside of oneself and can be expressed outside. Anything else? Did we both say our solutions? I want to say one more solution. Cold compassion. A plutonic person can learn to be compassionate for others in kind of a cool way. I mean, compassion is a cool thing, but I think that word's so overused that people don't get that compassion is something that very neutral and cool, and it's not necessarily like, happy or something, or like smiling. No, you're just compassionate in a way that's just cool and present and allowing someone else to be in your being yourself. And so that's my note on there and for solution. And then we had a bunch of solutions too, but definitely a very challenging aspect, I would say. But definitely something to integrate in oneself, to polarize. To integrate, to polarize again. It's definitely a life practice. You're on mute. Are you going to add something?
There's a lot of noises in the background that I'm trying to ameliorate, but I think those are right on what you're sharing. Would you say that Pluto or Sun opposite Pluto could have outbursts?
I mean, the mature expression for sure. The mature expression. And not that outbursts or something is an expression of immaturity. I mean, all emotional expression can be correct, in whatever way, whether it's an outburst or not. But definitely volatile. That energy can be, especially when young or when mature. um, you know, it's yeah, it could be intense outbursts.
What about if, since you're a teacher in your own way, what about if a child, someone's child had this aspect, like how would you parent someone with Sun opposite Pluto? Any parenting tips?
A lot of compassion, a lot of compassion, a lot of care, a lot of gentleness. Because you got to remember, like, this force, if it doesn't get expressed, if it doesn't have an avenue to get out of the kid or the child, they're just going to direct it inward. And you can't imagine the levels of guilt and shame that can be redirected inside of themselves, and how stultifying, you know, or stifling that could be for the child. You know what I mean? The projection, the inward projection that they could adapt. It's like a self-destructive, you know, possibility there. Suicides are in many cases possible in youth, just as your example of David Foster Wallace having, you know, suicide later on. I mean, plutonic energy is really heavy. I mean, you know, this last, what is it, these last 12, 13 years in Capricorn, like a lot of Capricorns have suffered immense things, you know.
Great point. The transit, you know, you're speaking of conjunct of Pluto on, rather, you know, casting its shadow onto one sun or moon.
And it's the
Or
Cancer
your whole
that
chart,
is in
if you're born
opposition.
in
Mhm.
late 80s, early 90s, and have all that Capricorn energy. It's been making its way, you know. So there, that whole cohort of people, you could say, have a lot of depth of character.
A life of trauma, right? A life of Pluto through all their planets in Capricorn. Wow. That's quite growth. That's quite a lot of potential growth there.
I don't know if it's always a life full of trauma, but it's definitely a life of learning those energies,
Yeah, yeah, better said.
however they express.
Mhm.
Cool. Any other thoughts?
No, I think we're good. I think we shared our solutions on that heavy, heavy plutonic energy. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.